Daoism. From the 6th century to the 3rd century BC, the chaotic times of conflicts and wars somehow produced a golden age of philosophy in China, comparable to what was going on in India and Greece. This period of 100 contending schools began with Confucius and an obscure philosopher named Lao-zi, who left a short book that has had an immense influence on China and the world called the Tao Te Ching, and which became the basis of the Daoist philosophy and religion. A century later, Mo-tzu founded an original philosophy which was prominent for 2 centuries. Lao-tzu. The historian Sima Qian tells us that Lao-tzu lived during the 6th century BC in the state of Chu and was a keeper of the archives in the imperial capital at Luoyang. Those who held this position were usually skilled in divination and astrology. The historian also relates that Lao-tzu met Confucius once and criticized him for his pride and ambition. But Confucius could only compare Lao-tzu to the powerful symbol of a dragon. Little else is known of the life of Lao-tzu, except the legend that when in old age he was leaving Chu, he was stopped by the guardian of the pass into the state of Qin and asked to write down his wisdom. In 3 days, he produced a book of 5,250 characters known as the Tao Te Ching, which means the classic of the way and its virtue, or power, or simply Way Power Book. Some scholars place Lao-tzu in the 4th century, though, because he is not mentioned by anyone else until then. It is often difficult to accept the ethics of Lao-tzu without first understanding the mystical ideas in his philosophy, which is based on an all-pervading unity he called the Way, or Tao. This Way is the source of heaven and earth and the mother of all things. Its essence can be seen by the desireless. Those who desire see its manifestations. From this unity comes the duality of relative opposites, yin-yang, such as beauty and ugliness, good and bad, being and non-being, difficult and easy, long and short, high and low, male and female, beginning and end, and so on. In a patriarchal and male-dominated age, Lao-tzu saw the value of relying on the female aspect of the universe by being receptive, sensitive, nourishing, etc. Thus he believed the wise give life but do not take possession, act but do not rely on their own ability, accomplish but claim no credit. Lao-tzu saw a way of not competing by not exalting the worthy, nor valuing rare treasure, nor displaying objects of desire so that people's hearts will not be disturbed. The wise keep their hearts pure, their bellies full, their ambitions weak, and their bones strong. They act without interfering with the natural flow so that all may live in peace. The Way is eternally present and infinitely useful as the fountainhead of all things. It came before any personified concept of God. This transcendental nature is beyond morality and therefore not humane. Mystically, it is empty, yet inexhaustible. The more it is used, the more it produces. Yet much talk can be exhausting. It is better to keep to the center. Lao-tzu revered the spirit of the valley as a mystic female that never dies and is the root of heaven and earth. The wise are humble like water, which flows to the lowest level, yet they come near the Way. In their dwellings they love the earth. In their hearts they love what is profound. In their friendship they love humanity. In their words they love sincerity. In government they love peace. In business they love ability. In their actions, they love timeliness. It is because they do not compete that there is no resentment. Moderation is taught as extremes of wealth and honor cannot be kept safe or lead to a downfall. Heaven's way is to withdraw as soon as one's work is done. Lao-tzu asked if one can concentrate one's vital force to be gentle like a baby, attain mystic clarity, love people and govern the state without interfering, play the female in opening the doors of heaven, and understand all without using the mind. Mystical virtue gives birth and nourishes without taking possession, acts without obligation, and leads without dominating. The usefulness of things is found in the freedom of their empty spaces. The way is invisible, inaudible, and intangible. The wise go beyond the senses and satisfy the inner self. Troubles come from being selfish. Those who value the world as themselves may be entrusted to care for the world. The way to make sense of a muddy world is to let it be still until it becomes clear. Those who are calm and do not overextend themselves can come back to life through activity, but not wearing out, they are not replaced. In serenity, one can see everything return to its source, like vegetation that grows and flourishes. Returning to the source is to know the eternal and be enlightened, impartial, universal, and in accord with heaven and the way. Not to know the eternal is to act blindly and court disaster. The worst leaders are those who are hated. The next worst are feared. The next loved and praised. But the best are those the people barely know, such that they say, "We did it ourselves." When the way is forgotten, the doctrines of humanity and morality arise. Knowledge and cleverness lead to hypocrisy. When family relationships are not harmonious, filial piety is advocated. When a country falls into chaos, loyal patriots are praised. Lao-zi suggested abandoning religion and cleverness, humanity and morality, skill and profit, and recommended instead simplicity, the natural, controlling selfishness, and reducing desires. Yielding can preserve unity. Bending can straighten. Emptying oneself can be fulfilling. Wearing oneself out leads to renewal. Having little is to be content, while having abundance is troubling. Because the wise do not compete, no one can compete with them. Lao-tzu observed that those standing on tiptoe are not steady. Those straining their strides cannot keep up. Those displaying themselves do not illuminate. Those justifying themselves are not distinguished. Those making claims are not given credit. And those seeking glory are not leaders. Frivolous and hasty leaders lose their foundation and self-mastery. The wise are good at helping people so that no one is rejected, and good at saving things so that nothing is wasted. Thus the good can teach the bad, who are the lessons for the good. Those who try to take over the world do not succeed. Tampering with it spoils it, and seizing it loses it. Lao-tzu opposed conquest by force of arms because it rebounds. When armies march, scarcity and famine follow. The skillful achieve their purposes and stop without relying on violence, which is contrary to the way. Whatever is contrary to the way will soon perish. Weapons are tools of destruction hated by the people, and followers of the way never use them. Peaceful leaders favor the creative left. War favors the destructive right. When the use of weapons cannot be avoided, the best policy is calm restraint. Victory is not glorious, and those who celebrate it delight in slaughter. Such killing should be mourned. Sharp weapons of the state should not be displayed. Lao-tzu taught what many taught before him, that the violent die a violent death. This he made primary in his teaching. Those who know others are wise. Those who know themselves are enlightened. Those who overcome others require force. Those who overcome themselves need strength. Those who are content are wealthy. Those who persevere have willpower. Those who do not lose their center endure. Those who die but maintain their power live eternally. Virtue does not emphasize its power, and thus is powerful. The inferior never forget their power, and thus are powerless. The best virtue does not interfere, nor have an ulterior motive. Lesser virtue interferes with an ulterior motive. Humanity takes action without an ulterior motive, while morality takes action with an ulterior motive. Rules of propriety take action, and finding no response, force it on them. Thus, when the way is lost, things degenerate from virtue to humanity, to morality, to the rules of propriety, which is the superficial expression of loyalty and faithfulness and the beginning of disorder. By attaining oneness, heaven becomes clear, earth stable, spirits divine, valleys fertile, creatures alive and growing, and kings leaders. When people live in accord with the way, horses work on farms, but when they do not, the cavalry practices in the parks. The greatest temptation to crime is desire. The greatest curse, discontent. The greatest calamity, greed. The wise have no fixed mindset, but regard the people's minds as their own. They are good to the good and bad, honest to the honest and dishonest, living peacefully and harmoniously, sharing a common heart, and treating the people as their own children. The mystical virtue nourishes, cares for, develops, shelters, comforts, nurtures, and protects, producing without possessing, helping without obligating, and guiding without controlling. When the fields are full of weeds and the granaries are empty, while some wear fancy clothes, carry sharp swords, overindulge in food and drink, having more possessions than they can use, the leaders are robbers. This is not the way. States are governed by justice, and wars are waged by violations. Yet the world can be mastered by non-intervention. The more restrictions there are, the poorer the people. The more sharp weapons, the more trouble in the state. The more clever cunning, the more contrivances. The more rules and regulations, the more thieves and robbers. Therefore the wise say, do not interfere, and people transform themselves. Love peace, and people do what is right. Do not intervene, and people prosper. Have no desires, and people live simply. When government is relaxed, people are happy, but when it is strict, they are anxious. When those responsible for justice become unjust, what seems good becomes evil. Lao-zi recommended frugality to be prepared from the start and in order to build up inner power. Those with maternal leadership can long endure. Governing a large country is like cooking a small fish. One must be careful not to overdo it. As the female overcomes the male with tranquility, a country can win over a small or large country by placing itself below. The difficult can be handled while it is still easy. Great accomplishments begin with what is small. The wise always confront difficulties before they get too large. Handle them before they appear. Organize before there is confusion. Be as careful at the end as at the beginning, and there will be no failure. The wise, in watching over people, speak humbly from below them, and in leading them, get behind them. Thus they do not oppress them nor block them, but everyone happily goes along without getting tired. From Lao-Tzu's three treasures of love, frugality, and not pushing oneself ahead of others come courage, generosity, and leadership. Love wins all battles and is the strongest defense, heaven giving it to save and protect. The best soldier is nonviolent. The best fighter is not angry. The best employer is humble. Strategy says not to be the aggressor, but the defender. Instead of advancing, retreat. This, paradoxically, is movement without moving, stretching the arm without showing it, confronting enemies with the idea there is no enemy, while holding in the hand no weapons. No disaster is worse than underestimating the enemy. But when the battle is joined, the kind will win. Those brave in killing will be killed, while those brave in not killing will live. The way of heaven does not strive, yet it wins easily. Like Confucius, Lao-zi found that the best knowledge is to know that you do not know. And like Socrates, he found that thinking you know when you do not is a disease. By recognizing this disease, the wise are free of it. Since people are not afraid to die, why threaten them with it? Those who try to do the work of the Lord of Death by executing rarely escape injuring their own hands. Only those who do not interfere with living are best at valuing life. The way of heaven takes from those who have too much and gives to those who do not have enough. But the human way is just the opposite. Only the person of the way has enough to give Only the person of the way has enough to give to the world. The wise do not hoard, but the more they give, the more they have. Those who bear the humiliation of the people can minister to them, and those who take on the sins of the society can lead the world. Lao-tzu envisioned a simple society in which food is tasty, clothes are beautiful, home is comfortable, and customs are delightful, so that people feel no need to travel. The way of heaven sharpens but does not harm, and accomplishes without striving. Zhuang-zi. Zhuang-zi lived in the state of Sung through most of the 4th century BC, probably dying shortly before 300 BC. According to the historian Sima Qian, he preferred to please himself and turned down an offer to be prime minister of Chu from King Wei, who ruled from 339 to 329 BC. Zhuang-zi wrote that he would rather drag his tail in the mud like a living turtle than be sacrificed like a sacred tortoise in the great temple. The book of 100,000 characters named after him was probably added to by later disciples in his imaginative and mystical style. Though he did not call himself a Daoist, Zhuang-zi respected Lao-tzu more than any other philosopher, and the way and its power or virtue is certainly central in his philosophy. In the first and last chapters, the Zhuang-zi refers to Sun King, and philosopher Mencius met going to Chu to try to persuade the king not to fight with Qin, using the argument that war is unprofitable, an idea Mencius criticized. Xunzi described Sun King as teaching that human desires are little, although everyone supposes their own passions are great. Xunzi believed that Sun King could not see that desires are many and felt he did not know the value of virtue. Xunzi credited Sun King for showing clearly that it is no disgrace to receive an insult, and that when people realize this, they will not fight. According to Xunzi, Sun King worked to check aggression and proposed disarmament, and so he considered him a Moist. He felt Sun did too much for others and not enough for himself. Zhuang-zi likewise considered the checking of aggression and disarmament proposals were the external achievement, while desiring few things was the inner cultivation of Sun King and Yin Wen. The legalist Han Fei-tzu wrote that Sun King preached not fighting, not making enemies, not feeling shame for being in prison, nor disgrace for being insulted. And he was honored by the rulers of the world for being liberal-minded. In the first chapter, Free and Easy Wandering, Zhuang-zi writes that Sun King would burst out laughing at a man who had enough wisdom to fill one office, good conduct to impress one community, virtue to please one ruler, and talent enough to serve one state. Such was Sun King's equanimity that he would not exert himself if the whole world praised him, nor would he mope if the whole world condemned him, for he drew a clear line between the internal and external, recognizing the boundaries of true glory and disgrace. In the last chapter, the Zhuang-zi discusses philosophers and says that Sun King and Yin Wen designed caps flat like Mount Hua to symbolize equality and peace. They preached liberality of mind to bring people together in harmony and assure concord. They walked everywhere to persuade those above them and teach those below them to end human strife, outlaw aggression, and abolish the use of arms in order to rescue the world from warfare. Asking for only 5 pints of rice, Zhuang-zi was afraid these teachers did not get their fill. Even though their disciples were hungry, they never forgot the rest of the world, being determined that everyone should live. Even though the world refused to listen, they never stopped asking to be seen, working for the external goal of outlawing aggression and weapons, and for the internal goal of lessening desires. Zhuang-zi also described how Shen Dao and others heard of the views of the ancients and discarded knowledge and any distinction between right and wrong. But he decided that this was not the true way. He observed that the logician Hui Shi could not seem to find any peace for himself, but went on separating and analyzing everything without achieving anything. Zhuang-zi liked the views of Lao-zi best, knowing the male but clinging to the female, and becoming the valley of the world. In the end, the Zhuang-zi refers to the writings of Chuang-tzu as a string of queer beads and baubles with outlandish terms and bombastic language, but which do not look at things from one angle only or with partisanship, yet they do no one any harm. A delightful and enigmatic writer, it is difficult to discuss the ethics of Zhuang-zi because he chose to transcend mundane activities in a quietistic and reclusive life. In his chapter on the equality of all things, he wrote, "Great understanding is broad and generous. Petty understanding is contentious. Great speech is clear and simple. Petty speech is quarrelsome. In sleep when the human spirit goes visiting, or awake when the body is free to move and act, in all their contacts and associations, some minds are relaxed, some are deep, and some are serious. We scheme and fight with our minds. We worry over small fears and are overwhelmed by great fears. The mind shoots forth like an arrow to be the arbiter of right and wrong. It clings to its position like a solemn pledge." Zhuang-zi pitied humans fixed in their bodily forms, pathetically clashing with things, laboring to the end of their days and never knowing where to look for rest. "Are humans not muddled?" he asked. "When the way relies on little accomplishments and vain show, then we have the rights and wrongs of the Confucians and the Moists. But they call each other's rights wrongs. The best thing is clarity. There is always a this and a that, but the wise see that they both have right and wrong in them. The consciousness which no longer finds their opposites is the hinge of the way, seeing both the right and wrong as a single infinity. A road is made by people walking on it. Things are so because they are called so. Only the person of far-reaching vision is able to make them into one. The wise harmonize both right and wrong and rest in heaven, the equalizer." Zhuang-zi called this walking two roads. The one who can understand discriminations that are not spoken, and the way that is not a way, may be called the reservoir of heaven, which poured into is never full, and dipped from never runs dry. Yet one does not know the source of its supply. This Zhuang-zi called the hidden light. When Yao sat on his throne and found his mind nagging him to attack other rulers, Shun replied that long ago 10,000 suns came out all at once and illuminated all things, and yet virtue is greater than those suns. Zhuang-zi asked how one knows that loving life is not a delusion, or hating death is not like a person who has left home and forgotten the way back. Suppose two people have an argument. Is the one who beats the other necessarily right and the other necessarily wrong? If the two cannot agree, should they get someone else to decide what is right? But they can only get someone who agrees with one or the other, or none, or both. So how can anyone else decide for them? Rather, Zhuang-zi suggested that we harmonize them with the heavenly equality, leave them to their endless changes, and so live out our years. Leap into the boundless and make it your home. Zhuang-zi dreamed that he was a butterfly, but when he awoke, he thought he might be a butterfly dreaming he was Zhuang-zi. This he called the transformation of things. Zhuang-zi often satirized a caricature of Confucius for trying to teach virtue, goodness, and justice. He observed that when the world has the way, the wise succeed, but when the world does not have the way, the wise survive. In times like the present, he found they did well to escape penalty. He suggested leaving off this teaching of virtue. Everyone knows the use of the useful, but no one knows the use of the useless. Many people excuse their faults and claim they do not deserve to be punished, but few admit their faults. Only a person of virtue knows what one cannot do anything about and is content with it. Zhuang-zi suggested that one not allow likes or dislikes to get in and do harm. Just let the things be the way they are and don't try to help life along. We go around telling each other, I do this or that, but how do we know that this I really exists? When we dream we are something else, how do we know whether we are awake or dreaming? Running around accusing others is not as good as laughing, which is not as good as going along with things. By forgetting about change, one can enter the mysterious oneness of heaven. Zhuang-zi suggested that we not embody fame or store up schemes or undertake projects or sell wisdom, but rather embody to the fullest what has no end and wander where there is no trail. Hold on to what you receive from heaven, but don't think you have got anything. Be empty and use the mind like a mirror. Go after nothing. Respond, but do not store. Thus one can win out over things and not hurt oneself. Zhuang-zi lamented that the way and its virtue have been cast aside in the call for goodness and justice. If the inborn nature had not been abandoned, there would be no need for rites and music. He blamed the sages for destroying the way and its virtue in order to create goodness and justice. What the ordinary world calls perfect wisdom, he described as piling things up for the benefit of a great thief. He pointed out that several famous persuaders were destroyed or forced to commit suicide by their rulers, who also came to violent deaths as a result of their wickedness. He observed that whoever steals a belt buckle pays with his life, but whoever steals a state gets to be a feudal lord. Yet everyone knows that goodness and justice are found at the gates of the feudal lords. Everyone knows enough to search for what they don't know, but no one knows enough to search for what they already know. Everyone knows enough to condemn what they take to be no good, but no one knows enough to condemn what they have already taken to be good. Zhuang-zi suggested that by resting in inaction, things will transform themselves. Forget you are a thing and join in a great unity with the deep and boundless. Undo the mind, slough off spirit, be blank and soulless, and everything will return to the root and not know why. But if you try to know it, you have already departed from it. Do not ask its name or try to observe its form. Let things live naturally of themselves. A great one teaches like a shadow that follows form, an echo that follows sound, only answering when questioned and pouring out thoughts like a companion of the world. Such a one blended with the great unity is selfless. The gentleman of ancient times fixed his eyes on possession, but the one who fixes on nothingness is the true friend of heaven and earth. The sage is not still because of taking stillness as good, but because the myriad of things are insufficient to distract the sage's mind. The mind of the sage in stillness is a mirror for heaven and earth. Some of the later writings of the Zhuang-zi have goodness, justice, loyalty, music, and rites coming out of the way and its virtue. But if all the emphasis is placed on the rites and music, then the world falls into disorder. In the ancient times, people did not use knowledge to trouble the world, but kept to their inborn nature. Instead of trying to rectify others, they rectified themselves, and in complete joy found the fulfillment of ambition. In the autumn floods, the god of the North Sea explains to the lord of the river that right and wrong are points of view based on preference. Everything can have some right to it, and anything can have something wrong with it. If you try to make right your master and do away with wrong, or make order your master and do away with disorder, you have not understood the principle of heaven and earth, or the nature of things. It would be like making heaven your master and doing away with earth, or making yin, the feminine, your master, and doing away with yang, masculine. Obviously, this is impossible. Zhuang-zi questioned whether perfect happiness is found in what the world honors, wealth, eminence, long life, and a good name, or in what the world enjoys, a life of ease, rich food, fine clothes, beautiful sights, and sweet sounds. Yet people who cannot get these things fret a great deal, which is a stupid way to treat the body, while others wear themselves out rushing around on business to pile up more wealth than they can ever use, which is a superficial way to treat the body. Ambitious people scheme day and night wondering if they are doing right, which is a shoddy way to treat the body, while others spend their lives worrying, which is a callous way to treat the body. Zhuang-zi simply took inaction to be happiness. After Zhuang-zi's mother died, a friend came and found him singing and pounding on a tub. When asked why he was not mourning, Zhuang-zi explained that at first he grieved, but then he looked back at the time before she was born and before she had a body or even a spirit, realizing that now she was merely undergoing another change. Zhuang-zi once slept on a skull, using it as a pillow, and dreamed that the dead person told him the dead are very happy because they have no rulers above nor subjects below and no seasonal chores. Having more happiness than a king on his throne, why would he want to come back to the troubles of a human being? Once Zhuang-zi went to see the king of Wei, who, seeing his coarse and patched clothes, thought he was in distress. Zhuang-zi explained that he was poor, but not in distress. If a person had the way and its virtue, but could not put them into practice, that would be distress. Zhuang-zi learned from Master King Sung that if he wanted to preserve his body and life, he must think only of how to hide himself away, no matter how remote or secluded the spot. Promoting people of worth began with Yao and Shun and led to people trampling over each other and stealing from each other. People have become more diligent in pursuing gain, so that sons kill fathers, ministers kill their lords, and men filch at midday. Rather, one should cling fast to life and keep the body whole, not falling prey to fidgeting and fussy thoughts and scheming. If one does not first perceive the sincerity within oneself before trying to act, each move will be a mistake. If outer concerns enter and are not expelled, each move will only add failure to failure. Action has its consequences. Whoever does what is not good in clear and open view will be seized and punished by people. Whoever does what is not good in the shadow of darkness will be seized and punished by spirits. Only the one who clearly understands both people and spirits can walk alone. Whoever concentrates on the internal and does deeds that bring no fame will have light, but whoever concentrates on the external, hoarding of goods, is a mere merchant. The inner protects us from the outer. But if one bets too much in an archery contest, too much emphasis on the outer makes the inner clumsy. Zhuang-zi suggested how to wipe out delusions of the will, undo the snares of the heart, rid oneself of the entanglements of virtue, and open up the roadblocks in the way. The 6 delusions of the will are eminence, wealth, recognition, authority, fame, and profit. The 6 snares of the heart are appearances, carriage, complexion, features, temperament, and attitude. The 6 entanglements to virtue are loathing, desire, joy, anger, grief, and happiness. The 6 roadblocks in the way are rejecting, accepting, taking, giving, knowledge, and ability. When these no longer see the within, one may achieve uprightness, stillness, enlightenment, and the emptiness which results in doing nothing. Yet there is nothing that is not done. Action which has become artificial is lost. Action which is done because one cannot do otherwise is virtuous. If the one who launches into action is not really acting, then the action is a launching into inaction. Whoever wishes to be still must calm one's energies. Whoever wishes to be spiritual must compose one's mind. Whoever wishes to succeed must go along with what cannot be avoided. Yet the wise look at the inevitable and decide that it is not inevitable, thus not having recourse to arms. People usually look at what is inevitable and decide that it is inevitable, thus having frequent recourse to arms. Whoever turns to arms is always seeking something, and whoever trusts in arms is lost. Zhuang-zi admired the simpler times before even the ancient emperors Yao and Shun, when the legendary Yellow Emperor ruled. Once the Yellow Emperor came upon a boy herding horses who advised him on ruling the empire by saying that it is not much different from herding horses. Simply get rid of what is harmful to the horses. That is all. Here we find the same universal principle of not harming that in India is called ahimsa. Not everyone is suited to the reclusive life. A prince of Wei told the Daoist adept Zhuang-zi that his body was beside the rivers and seas, but his mind was still back at the court of Wei. Zhuang-zi suggested that he emphasize life more than material gain. The prince complained that he knew he should do that, but it went against his inclinations. Zhuang-zi recommended that if he could not overcome his inclinations, he should follow them. For if he tried to force himself, he would do double injury to himself. Those who do double injury to themselves do not live long. Zhuang-zi concluded that although the prince of Wei was not able to follow the way, at least he had the will to do so. The petty person will die for riches. The better person will die for reputation. Yet they are both willing to throw away what is theirs for what is not theirs. Crooked or straight, it is better to follow the heaven within. Right or wrong, it is better to hold to the center upon which everything turns. In solitude, bring your will to completion and ramble in the company of the way. Do not strive for consistency or try to perfect justice, or you will lose what you already have. Do not race after riches nor risk your life for success, or heaven will slip away from you. In Zhuang-zi, an old fisherman teaches Confucius the 8 faults and 4 evils. The faults are officiousness, doing what is not your business; obsequiousness, rushing forward when no one has nodded in your direction; sycophancy, echoing others' opinions and trying to draw them out; flattery, speaking without regard for what is right or wrong; calumny, delighting in talking about others' faults; maliciousness, breaking up friendships and family relations; wickedness, praising falsely so as to cause injury; and treachery, two-facedly stealing another party's wishes. The 4 evils are avidity, altering accepted ways, hoping to enhance your merit and fame; avarice, insisting you know it all and that everything be done your way, snatching things from others for your own use; obstinacy, refusing to change recognized errors, listening to remonstrance, and behaving worse than before; and bigotry, commending those who agree with you and refusing to see any good in those who do not agree with you. For this strange fisherman, truth means purity and sincerity in the highest degree and is received from heaven, while rights are created by the vulgar people of the world. The wise pattern themselves on heaven, value truth, and do not allow themselves to be cramped by the vulgar. Those who do not depart from pure and true are heavenly, holy, and perfect. The wise make heaven the source, virtue the root, and the way the gate, revealing oneself through change and transformation. This is contrasted to the gentleman who makes goodness the standard of kindness, justice the model of reason, rituals the guide of conduct, and music the source of harmony. Li-zi. The Daoist Li-zi is mentioned by Zhuang-zi and is therefore supposed to have lived in the 5th or 4th centuries BC in the state of Jing for at least 40 years as a common person. Little else is known about him except from the stories in the Zhuang-zi and the Lie-zi, a book which is supposed to have been written over several centuries and formalized with a commentary in the 4th century CE. Lie-zi was also a recluse who never accepted political appointment, and his stories are similar to those of Zhuang-zi. His reclusive life is indicated in a story of Lie-zi and his teacher Huainan-zi in the Zhuang-zi. Lie-zi found a shaman who could predict the future, including when people would die. Lie-zi thought he had found a higher teaching. So Huainan-zi told him to bring the shaman to meet him. The first time, he predicted that Huainan-zi would die within the week. The second time, he predicted that he would get better. The third time, the shaman said the master was never the same and asked him to steady himself. But the fourth time, the shaman ran away and could not be found. This fourth time, Huainan-zi had appeared to him not yet emerged from the source. Lie-zi realized that he had not yet begun to learn anything. Lie-zi went home and cooked for his wife and did not go out for the last 3 years of his life. In another story from Zhuang-zi, the gatekeeper Yin explains to Lie-zi how by guarding the pure breath, one may rest within the bounds that know no excess, hide within the borders that know no source, wander where everything has its end and beginning, unify one's nature, nourish one's breath, unite one's virtue, and thereby communicate with what creates all things. Such a person guards what belongs to heaven and keeps it whole. Lie-zi recounted how he asked old Shang to be his master and Bai Gaozi his friend while he worked hard to discipline himself. For 3 years he was afraid to have notions of right and wrong and did not dare to speak of benefit and harm. 5 years later he thought freely of right and wrong and did speak of benefit and harm. Then, 7 years after that, his thoughts came naturally without conceptions of right and wrong, and his words were natural without intending to please or offend. After another 9 years, nothing he said without restraint whatever came to him without knowing whether it was right or wrong, pleasing or offending his or another's. By then, he did not think of whether old Shang was his master or Bai Gaozi his friend. The barrier between the inner and outer disappeared. He perceived with all his senses at once. His mind concentrated and his body relaxed. He drifted like the wind. Wen-zi, who is supposed to have studied under Lao-zi, may have been another of Lie-zi's teachers. Wen-zi, or Kuan Yin, told him that if his words are beautiful or ugly, so also is their echo. Conduct will follow one like a shadow. Thus he is advised to be careful of his words, for someone may agree with them, and be careful of his conduct, because someone may imitate it. The wise can know what will go in by seeing what came out. One can know what is coming by observing what has passed. We judge by our own experience and verify it by the experience of others. If someone loves one, one will surely love that person. But if someone hates one will surely hate that person. The greatest emperors loved the empire, and the worst hated the empire. Lie-zi also wrote about Zhuang-zi, who lived around 400 BC and was criticized by Mencius for having such a selfish philosophy that he would not give up one hair off his body to save the empire. According to the Lie-zi, Zhuang-zi's philosophy was to preserve one's own body and enjoy the present. Zhuang-zi believed that the ancients correctly placed no value on reputation or honor. He believed that if people did not try to make things better, the world would be in order. For Zhuang-zi, life is temporarily staying in the world, and death is a temporary departure. When Lie-zi was poor and starving in Jing, a friend told the chief minister that Lie-zi had attained the way but was poor and unrecognized. He asked the minister to send him a gift. The chief minister sent Lie-zi a gift of grain, but Lie-zi politely refused the gift. His wife scolded him, complaining that the wives and children of other sages live comfortably while they are starving. How could he refuse this food? Lie-zi smiled and explained that if he was honored because of someone else's opinion, that someone else's opinion could also condemn him. Later, the chief minister fell out of popular favor, and the king, swayed by public opinion, had him executed. The Lie-zi tells a story of a king who was only interested in hiring the strong and brave as being the best to protect him. Not pleased with those who preached morality, he asked the visiting philosopher what he could teach him. The philosopher asked him if he would be interested in a strategy that would guarantee that anyone who attempted to stab him would miss. The king wanted to hear about it. Yet it would be a better strategy if people did not dare to strike him at all. The king agreed. An even better strategy than that would be if people did not even want to harm him. Yet people not wanting to harm him would still not be as good as getting them to love and benefit him. The king agreed he was looking for such a strategy, which is 3 degrees better than strength and courage. The philosopher then pointed out that Confucius and Mo-tzu were respected even though they were not princes. If the king, who already has political power, were to rule his people with virtue and integrity, would not his greatness surpass that of Confucius and Mo-tzu? After the philosopher left, the king admitted that he had been completely turned around by this argument. Many of Lie-zi's stories show how psychological impressions can alter perception of reality. An old and poor farmer heard that the power of Tzu-wa could make a poor man rich. So he joined the followers of Tzu-wa, who teased him for being a bumpkin. He was offered rewards for doing extraordinary feats, like diving into water and saving goods from a burning house, which the farmer did in his innocence because he did not know how hard they were. Impressed, they asked the farmer how he accomplished these feats. He explained that he merely believed what they said about how Tzu-wa could make him rich. His only concern was that he might not believe or act on what they told him. He forgot about his body and what might benefit or harm him. Now that he realized they were making fun of him, he thought about the dangers he escaped in the water and fire and became aware of the worries and fears inside him. The story concludes with Confucius drawing the moral that if a person has perfect faith, one can move heaven and earth. A man tried to steal gold in the market because he was so carried away by the sight of the gold that he forgot about the officers who arrested him. Another man who lost his money thought his neighbor's son had stolen it. He noticed that he had the look and gestures of a thief. Well, later he found the money, and looking at his neighbor's son saw that neither his movements nor his gestures were those of a thief. Lao-zi valued emptiness because he felt that attachments of recognition, approval, and disapproval imprison us. It is better not to worry about such things. Rather than be concerned about taking credit for accomplishments, why not relax and observe the workings of heaven and earth? In emptiness, one can cultivate stillness and peace of mind so that one will not be drawn into the unnecessary troubles of this crazy world. If you lose the way, you lose yourself. Lie-zi also admired the Yellow Emperor for seeing that his people were happy and retiring to a simple life. First, though, he worked hard for 15 years in governing, but his physical and mental health both became worse. So he withdrew from courtly life for 3 months. During this vacation, the Yellow Emperor dreamed he visited a Western paradise where there were no leaders or teachers, and desires and aversions did not develop. Believing he was enlightened by the dream, the Yellow Emperor spent the next 20 years letting his kingdom be as in the dream. When he died and ascended into heaven, his people mourned the passing of a great ruler. Huainan-zi. The Taoist collection of 21 essays, called the Huainan-zi, seems to have been a combined effort of 8 Taoist scholars and several admirers of Chu Yuan under the sponsorship of Liu An, the king of Huainan, who committed suicide when his planned revolt was aborted in 122 BC. The Huainan-zi was presented to Emperor Wu in 139 BC. The resentful attitude, military plans, and planned revolt of the king of Huainan, however, are in direct contradiction to the teachings of this book. Though Liu An was known to have had literary gifts and may have contributed to the Huainan-zi. The essays amplify and illustrate the philosophical ideas of Lao-zi, focusing on the way, goodness, and justice. Its alternate title means greatly enlightening. The first essay is on the way, Tao, which embraces heaven and supports the earth. A person in the way lives happily without anxiety. The authors point out that militarism breeds militarism, just as fighting fire with fire makes it more violent. And beating a vicious dog or whipping a kicking horse does not correct them nor enable them to travel far. Violent measures and strict punishments are not fit instruments for a king. The one who follows the natural way of heaven and earth finds it easy to manage the whole world without acting. Nevertheless, one is equal to a sudden crisis, disposes of calamities, and prevents difficulties. Firmness can be attained and strength overcome by yielding. Military fire will be extinguished with humble water. Hard things die sooner, just as teeth decay, but not the tongue. Finding one's true self results in the highest joy. The inner is always better than the outer. The heart governs life. When each individual follows the law of nature, everything identifies with heaven. There is no right or wrong, and everything is as it should be. The covetous and ambitious desires allured by power distance the spirit from the body and close off the heart from higher influences, leading to actions contrary to justice and disasters. The second essay of the Huainan-zi on beginning and reality reflects on the primeval paradise when the artificial doctrines of goodness and justice had not yet arisen. When the senses are closed, ambition stopped. One may roam in the void, breathe in yin and breathe out yang in harmony with the virtue of creation. When these overflow, there will be goodness and justice. But when the Confucians set up goodness and justice as ultimate, then the way and its virtue are abandoned and lost. The wise cultivate the way within, not by the outward adornment of goodness and justice. In the original simplicity was unity, quietness, and no governing authority and divided classes. When purity and simplicity disappeared, truth was adulterated by opinions, and the spirit of cooperation was lost. With the decaying of the Zhou dynasty, the philosophies of Confucius, Mo-tzu, and Zhuang-zi competed with polemics. Not having power, they were not able to put their ideals into operation. Thus, they were never free of anxiety. Yet the soul, not clogged with desires and knowledge, meets every perception without bias and in serenity. The essay on the living soul describes how the person who follows the stillness of the inner way does not fear death, and therefore cannot be made to do wrong. Several examples are given of rulers whose desires led them to bad ends. Confucianism does not remove the root of desire from the mind. To try to keep society from theft and burglary by fear of punishment is not as good as to remove the desire for stealing from the heart. Discussing natural law, the authors describe a decadent age when men dug up mountains for gems, wrought metals, killed animals for skins and furs, cut down forests for wood, or burnt them to drive out game. Yet the luxuries and abundance of the rulers still did not satisfy them. Mountains and streams were divided by boundaries. Classes of people were differentiated. Then soldiers and weapons brought about wars and the untimely deaths of the oppressed people. The harmonious cooperation of heaven and earth depends on the human spirit. Excess leads to waste, conflict, taxes, despair, and degeneration. In the ancient times, if a ruler oppressed the people, he was removed and replaced. Now, rulers use soldiers unjustly, rob people, and make slaves. Use of the military should depend on justice. In the 11th essay, the difference between a disordered country that is full and a well-governed country that is void is explained. Void does not mean empty of people, but that everyone guards their duties, while full does not mean many people, but that they are involved in inconsequential branch-tip matters. Also, a preserved country being insufficient does not mean a lack of goods, but that desires are moderated so that regulations are few. while a ruined country having a surplus does not mean having many resources, but that people are impetuous and have many expenses. Right and wrong is considered to be relative to each situation. Each generation takes as right what is right by it, and wrong what is wrong by it. Thus each generation is different, considering themselves right and others wrong. The heart seeks the right and pushes away the wrong. Goodness depends on timing. On the other hand, sufficiency and surplus enable one to yield, but the insufficiency leads to competition, cruelty, and disorder. When things are abundant, desire decreases, seeking is sated, and competition stops. Even the strict laws of the Qin Empire could not prohibit disorder, while the wealth of Han Dynasty times led to correctness. The 12th essay discusses how actions have their consequences and points out that frequent wars exhaust the people, and the pride of victories can consume their vitality. The saying is quoted, "Don't fight for peace. Peace will come naturally." This essay illustrates and quotes many passages from the Tao Te Ching. The 13th essay declares that the good of the people is the fundamental and unvarying law. Legislation must be determined by considering current conditions. During disturbances, it should be swift and severe, but in times of peace, easy and tolerant. Most healthy is a balance of female and male energy. Strict enforcement is harsh and destroys concord. Love is lenient, but too much lenience results in disobedience. Punishment is cruel, and too much punishment dissipates affection. The wise judge success by the life of the people. Those following the right way are bound to grow, though it may be small at first. Those who follow ways of death are bound to come to an end. A government that follows a policy of selfish gain will be ruined. The wise adapt to circumstances, bending and yielding to achieve the end in view. Those who are satisfied with simple needs will find it easy to be good, but lying, stealing, and murdering are contrary to nature and very difficult. Perhaps the most illuminating essay in the Huainan-zi is the 15th on generalship and prevention of anarchy. The authors believed that the ancients did not use the military to enlarge territory or from lust for gain, but to preserve a dynasty, pacify rebels, and eliminate dangers afflicting the people. However, when goods are unequally distributed, communities contend with the strong oppressing the weak, and the bold terrorizing the timid. Instead of using teeth and claws, humans make weapons and armor, enabling the greedy to rob others. The wise attempt to quell this rapacity and bring peace to disturbed people by defining duty. The wise kings of old employed soldiers to quell anarchy and discipline the unruly. No crime is worse than killing the innocent to feed unprincipled rulers or to grab territory for an ambitious person. The authors point out that if certain individuals who ruined their countries had been arrested early in their evil course, they never could have robbed violently as they did. One person pandering to vicious desires causes general suffering, an outrage intolerable to the law of heaven. Kings were established primarily to restrain violence and punish anarchy. But kings have come to take advantage of their power, becoming an instrument for burdening the people. The authors asked if it is not justifiable to exterminate those who play the tiger. Thus, troops were put in motion to curtail an oppressive enemy, prince, to reprimand his injustice. The army was not allowed to cut down trees, injure graves, burn crops, destroy property, rob animals, or enslave people. The prince who had killed innocent people was doomed by heaven and hated by people. The army came to replace him with someone just. Violators of this law were considered traitors to the people. The country that surrenders will have its freedom. In a word, the punishment of the kingdom shall not fall on the people. With the punishment of the king and a change of government, the gentry shall be honored, the worthy employed, the orphans and widows shall be cared for, and kindness shown to the poor and needy. Further, innocent prisoners shall be released, and the meritorious shall be rewarded. Such justice and clemency will ensure the allegiance of the people, who will open their doors to the invading army and await its coming. Thus, when the king does not have the way, his subjects look to invading soldiers as a parched land looks for rain. When just soldiers come, there is no war. However, in recent times, even when the king does not have the way, his soldiers defend the city. The invading army attacks for conquest and aggrandizement rather than to curb a wrongdoer. Thus, men are slain in war because it is all for self now. The selfish aggressor is left to his own fate. Whoever has the goodwill of the people will be strong in spite of small resources, but the powerful monarch who has lost the people's goodwill is certain to perish. Destruction is the aim of the soldier, but what is better is to have no destruction, no war. Thus, the best soldier in accord with the divine is not harmful. Weapons are not sharpened, yet no enemy dare attack. The one who fights without leaving the temple is the emperor. The one whose virtue is felt is the king. The practice of perfect government leads people to long for such virtue. Victory won without drawing the sword, resulting in obedience, implies the art of perfect rule, which imitates the way of heaven. Soldiers of the way never need to send forth the war chariot, because when justice is advertised to the many and the delinquent are reprimanded for their faults, powerful states will pay attention and small principalities will bow their heads in obedience to the wishes of the people who desire peace. The reprimand takes advantage of the people's strength, for it is in their interest to eliminate wrongs. Identity of interest brings mutual cooperation. Identity of feeling brings unity of action and mutual achievement. When there is identity of desire, mutual help follows. And when action is carried on in the spirit of the Tao, the whole empire is responsive. When the anxieties of the people are considered, the whole empire will join in a conflict. The enlightened king uses soldiers in the interests of the community for the elimination of evil in the land. Everyone participates in the benefit. No enemy can withstand this when the troops serve all. When soldiers are used for public ends, anything can be accomplished. When they are used selfishly, little can be done. The essentials of victory do not lie in the weapons, tools, and supplies, which are the army's capital. What is essential for the general is intuitive intelligence. When the people are more worthy than the rulers, there will be estrangement and a weak army. The essentials of victory are when virtue and justice influence all the people, when means are sufficient to meet dangers, when officers are selected well, and when measures and plans are made with knowledge of strengths and weaknesses. The example of the second Qin emperor is given to show how his personal extravagance, heedless of the people's needs, conscription and taxes amounting to half the nation's wealth, and harsh punishments led to discontent, suspicion, and a rebellion in which people started out with no weapons at all. Led by a humble man, the rebel army led all before it, and the old order was swept away like a fleeting cloud, because the hearts of the people were full of anger and resentment. Yet those who govern well need never fear an enemy, and those who follow high moral principles will have no wars to wage. Good leaders and generals accumulate virtue, and the people will serve loyally. The essay goes on to describe specific tactics according to Daoist principles, always emphasizing the higher unity and transcendent way. So, if you have any questions or comments. I particularly found this last part interesting from this Huainan-zi book, which is rather obscure, which I found in the UCSB library, a couple of translations of chapters from it. There was not a complete translation, but there were several chapters that were translated. In fact, I was thinking of this particularly today because I don't know if you ever listen to Garrison Keillor on Writer's Almanac. He gives the things that happened this day in history, And one of the ones for today was in 1936. On this day, Adolf Hitler took over the Rhineland. And France wanted to do something, and England didn't want to do anything, the government at that time. And this was a violation of the Versailles Treaty, which was the treaty agreed to after World War I. And in retrospect, we think about it now, it's easy to see things in hindsight. But one of the things that I believe in my efforts on world peace and the philosophy of peace and strategies and tactics for preventing wars is to use this Daoist philosophy of solving problems when they're small. And if the League of Nations and the peace treaty had been, even before that, Hitler took the Rhineland, if that had been adhered to, Germany never should have been allowed to rearm. And when they started taking over things that were not theirs to take over, if they had been stopped, it would have been so much easier to stop them when the problem was small. And so I think this is part of what the Daoists are saying, is that, you solve the problem when it's small. You don't wait until it gets so horrendous that you have this huge war where you're killing millions of people. And that's why another reason why disarmament would be a really helpful thing, because we could reduce the levels of the weapons and then solve problems when they're small before they get big. But of course, we're in a situation now where we could have a major war at any time which could destroy our civilization.